The desert was never silent. It whispered through the dry winds, hissed through shifting dunes, and rattled across the rusted tin roof of the old shack. But that night, the sound that reached the poor farmer's ears was different. Not the usual cry of a coyote, not the groan of thirsty wood. It was something deeper, metallic, hollow, as if the earth itself was knocking from beneath. He froze, lantern trembling in his hand. Out there in the stretch of barren land he had bought for almost nothing, the noise repeated, a clang, then silence. A heartbeat later, again, clang. The farmer's name was Elias, a man weathered by years of failure, his hands cracked by sun and soil that gave him little in return. He had left behind a trail of debts and shame in the town he once called home. This land, bought with the last of his meager savings, was his final gamble. The desert had been cheap because no one wanted it. Useless sand, cursed with drought. Yet to Elias it was hope, or at least, the last illusion of it. Now, as he stepped barefoot onto the cold sand, hope felt far away. The moonlight stretched shadows across the uneven ground. His lantern threw a circle of light that swayed with every nervous step. He followed the sound, pulse drumming in his ears louder than the shifting winds. His dog, Rufus, padded at his side, hackles raised, ears twitching at every noise. Then, without warning, Rufus growled. Low, deep, dangerous. Elias stopped breathing. There, in the sand ahead, the earth bulged slightly, as if something beneath it stirred. The clang came again, louder now, sharp, and with it, a vibration through the soles of his feet. Elias nearly dropped the lantern. His throat tightened as a memory from childhood surfaced. Stories told by his grandfather about buried things in the desert, treasures hidden by men who never returned, and curses left behind to guard them. Easy, boy, he whispered to Rufus, though his own voice shook. The ground quivered once more, a hollow tremor, then silence. Absolute silence, the kind that pressed against the eardrums and made the body ache for any sound, any explanation. Elias lifted the lantern higher. He saw nothing but sand, scattered rocks, and the skeletal remains of a long-dead cactus. And then, Rufus barked furiously. The dog lunged forward, paws tearing at the sand. Elias staggered back as grains flew into the lantern light. Rufus clawed at the ground as if possessed, as if something buried there demanded to be uncovered. The clang returned with each strike of his paws until Elias realized it wasn't Rufus making the metallic sound. It was coming from beneath him. The farmer fell to his knees, driven by equal parts fear and curiosity. His hands joined the frantic digging, coarse sand scraping his skin raw. The smell of iron, faint and metallic, filled the air as the sand gave way to something solid. His nails struck rust. A box. No, larger. A chest. Wooden, reinforced with iron bands eaten by time, half-rotted but unmistakably crafted, buried so deep no storm should have ever revealed it. Elias froze, heart hammering. His mind raced with thoughts of gold, relics, or perhaps bones. He reached out to wipe the sand from its surface. The metal was cold, too cold, as if it had never belonged to the desert. Rufus whimpered now, backing away, ears flat. The farmer's lantern flickered, flame bending as though the air itself was pulling toward the chest. And in that stillness, Elias heard it again. From inside the box, a sound, not a clang this time, not metal against stone, but a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, from beneath the earth, from inside. Elias stumbled back, sand collapsing into the shallow pit. His lantern nearly fell, and for an instant, the desert was swallowed by darkness before the flame steadied again. His breath came in short, panicked bursts. Something was alive, or something wanted out. The poor farmer stared at the half-buried chest, his body trembling, sweat chilling on his brow despite the night air. He should have run. He should have left it alone. But Elias had nothing left to lose, and so, with shaking hands and the weight of desperation pressing harder than fear, he whispered to the silent desert, "What are you?" And the desert did not answer, only the box. Another knock. By dawn, the desert looked less threatening, yet no less desolate. The horizon shimmered with heat, though the day had only just begun, and the air carried that dry, metallic taste of sandstorms waiting somewhere beyond sight. Elias stood outside his shack, hands resting on the splintered wood of the doorframe, staring at the same stretch of land that had frightened him only hours before. He told himself the night had been a dream, A trick of exhaustion, a hallucination carved from hunger and fear. The chest buried in the sand, the knocking, it couldn't have been real. But then his gaze drifted to the uneven mound not far from his home, the place where Rufus had dug, and he knew. Real or not, the earth was different there, disturbed, waiting. Elias rubbed his eyes, weary. The truth was, his body had grown too weak for fear. Years of labor had hardened him, but they had also broken him. His back carried the memory of every failed harvest, every storm that stripped his fields bare. Poverty was not new. It had been the constant companion of his life, shadowing him even when he tried to start fresh. This shack, this cheap desert plot, was not a dream. It was a surrender. The wind shifted, bringing with it the faint scent of smoke from a neighbor's chimney miles away. Elias thought of people who had families to cook for, voices inside their homes, laughter in the walls. His own shack echoed with silence. Once, long ago, it had been different. Once, there had been warmth, his wife's voice humming an old hymn, his daughter's tiny hands tugging at his sleeves, asking for stories before sleep. But the fever had come, and it had taken them both. Elias swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the horizon so the memories wouldn't consume him. He had carried grief like a stone in his chest ever since. Sometimes he prayed, sometimes he cursed, and most days he simply endured. Rufus nudged his leg, grounding him back to the present. The dog was loyal, perhaps the only soul who truly kept him alive. Elias crouched to scratch behind his ears. "You're all I've got, boy," he whispered. Rufus wagged his tail but kept his eyes on the mound of sand, uneasy still. The farmer's stomach growled, loud in the quiet morning. He hadn't eaten since the day before, and even then it was only stale bread. The desert did not forgive hunger. It stretched out endlessly, demanding more from a man than it ever gave back. Elias was running out of supplies, running out of options. The town had already grown tired of his debts. One neighbor had warned him bluntly, "Sell what you can, old man, before it buries you alive." But what was left to sell? A rusted plow, a shack barely holding, and this cursed land. He turned back toward the mound. For a moment, the rising sun painted the sand in streaks of gold, making the disturbed earth glimmer faintly. Elias narrowed his eyes. What if, just what if, there really was something down there? Something buried that didn't belong to the desert? His grandfather's stories haunted him again, of Spanish gold, of bandits who had hidden treasures in the earth when the law came too close, of relics older still, left by people who vanished into the dust. Tales Elias had once dismissed as foolish bedtime myths now seemed to claw at his mind with sharp, unrelenting fingers. The chest. He had seen it. He had touched the iron bands with his own hands. Unless he had gone mad in the night, it was real. The thought burned in him, battling against fear. Elias picked up the dented tin cup that served as his only possession of worth and drank from the water barrel. The liquid was warm, tasted of rust, but it cooled his dry throat. He stared at the shack's cracked wall, where a faded photograph of his wife and daughter still hung. Their faces were ghost-like now, worn by sun and time, but their eyes still held him, still reminded him of why he had once fought so hard to keep going. "Maybe this land has one last gift," he muttered under his breath. "Maybe it's not all cursed." Rufus barked once, sharp as if answering him. Elias exhaled. Whatever was buried there, whatever knocked from within the earth, he would find out. Because the alternative was to starve, to fade away unnoticed, forgotten like the many before him who had gambled their lives against the desert. And just as Elias is about to step into a mystery that could either save or destroy him, I want to pause here for you watching this story unfold. If you're drawn into Elias's journey already, into the desert winds, the secrets beneath the sand, make sure to subscribe to this channel. That way you won't miss the twists still to come. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which part of the world is hearing this story tonight. The sun climbed higher, throwing waves of heat across the land. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow and grabbed the shovel leaning against the shack. His grip was weak, but his determination sharper than ever. With Rufus at his side, he walked toward the mound. The desert buzzed with insects, the hum of something alive yet unseen. And for a heartbeat, Elias felt as though unseen eyes followed his every step. He jammed the shovel into the sand. The first strike was clumsy, heavy. Sand spilled over his boots. Again and again. Each thrust of the blade stirred a rush of dust into the air, dry as bone, sticking to the sweat on his arms and face. Rufus whined, circling the pit as Elias dug deeper. The iron bands emerged again, this time clearer in the light of day. His hands shook as he brushed the sand away, revealing wood that was rotting yet solid enough to have survived untold years underground. Elias dropped to his knees, pressing his ear against the chest. At first, nothing, only his own ragged breath. Then, so faint he thought he imagined it, a pulse. Not a sound this time, a vibration, as if the chest itself had a heartbeat. Elias staggered back, chest heaving. The desert swirled with hot air around him, and a voice in his mind whispered, "Do not open it." But another, louder voice replied, "What if this is your salvation?" He looked at the photograph of his family in his memory, at the endless desert, at Rufus, watching him with loyal, worried eyes, and with trembling fingers he began to clear away the last of the sand. The shovel struck wood again, a hollow thud that made Elias flinch as though he had touched something forbidden. Sweat dripped down his temples, stinging his eyes, but he did not stop. The chest was now fully exposed, its rotting frame outlined against the sand like the bones of a long-buried beast. He knelt, brushing the dirt away with trembling hands. The iron bands were rusted but strong enough to hold. The wood, though ancient, pulsed faintly with warmth against his skin. Elias pulled his hand back as if burned. Rufus whined, pacing, tail low. "Easy, boy," Elias whispered, though the words tasted hollow. His heart was pounding so loud it drowned out the desert's whispers. He leaned closer, ear nearly touching the wood. At first, silence. Then came a low vibration, subtle, steady, not like the random groan of shifting timber but rhythmic. Thump, 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 like a heartbeat. Elias staggered back, his legs tangling in the sand. His chest heaved. A chest with a pulse. Was it madness? Hunger? Exhaustion? He had worked without food, without water. Too many days in the sun. Maybe the desert was playing tricks. But Rufus barked sharply, hackles raised, as if confirming that Elias was not imagining things. Then the knocking returned. 3 times. Slow, deliberate. Elias's mouth went dry. He whispered, "Who's in there?" Of course no reply came. Only silence, followed by the faint hiss of shifting sand as the wind picked up again. He sat back, staring at the chest. His instincts screamed to leave it buried. His desperation, however, whispered otherwise. If there was anything valuable inside, gold, relics, even documents, it could change everything. He could pay his debts, rebuild his life. As the thought grew, a shadow fell across him. Elias turned sharply. At the ridge above his shack stood a figure, a man, tall and broad, with a wide-brimmed hat shielding his face from the sun. The farmer's gut clenched. He knew who it was. Jeb Cartwright, a neighbor in land only by distance but closer than Elias ever wanted. Cartwright owned miles of pasture to the east, inherited from a family that had grown fat off cattle while Elias's bloodline starved. The man had eyes like cold steel and a reputation darker than the storms that sometimes rolled across the desert. "What have you got there, Elias?" Cartwright's voice carried easily across the dry air. Elias scrambled to stand, brushing sand from his shirt. "Just clearing some ground," he lied, his voice too quick, too defensive. Cartwright walked closer, boots crunching on gravel, his horse trailing behind. His eyes narrowed as he glanced at the half-buried chest. A smirk tugged at his lips. "Funny thing to clear ground right there," Cartwright said. "Been riding past these lands near 20 years. Never thought there was much worth digging for." Elias clenched his fists. "It's my land. Bought it fair. Cheap land's rarely worth the coin it's paid for." Cartwright spat to the side, then leaned slightly, his shadow now covering part of the chest. "But sometimes the earth surprises you." The tension thickened. Rufus growled low, stepping between the 2 men. Elias forced calm into his voice. "I don't want trouble." "Trouble?" Cartwright chuckled, but his eyes stayed sharp. "No, Elias. You've already got plenty of that. Word in town is you owe debts, bad ones. Men are waiting for you to fail. Maybe they'll take this land when you can't pay. Maybe I will." Elias swallowed hard, heat pressing down on him as though the sun itself was siding with his enemy. Cartwright tapped the iron band of the chest with the tip of his boot. The metallic ring echoed unnaturally loud. Elias stiffened, praying Cartwright hadn't noticed the faint pulse beneath. "What's inside, you reckon?" the man asked softly, eyes gleaming. "Looks old. Looks valuable." Elias's mouth opened, then closed. The wrong word here could doom him. "I don't know yet." he said finally. Cartwright studied him for a long moment, then grinned. A predator's grin. Well, I reckon I'll be back to see. Things buried don't stay buried for long, Elias. You remember that. With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, dust trailing behind him like smoke. Elias's knees weakened. He collapsed beside the chest, running a hand over his face. Cartwright's appearance was no coincidence. He had seen something, or sensed it. Elias knew the man would return, and next time, he wouldn't come alone. The chest seemed to hum beneath him. Rufus barked once, snapping Elias's attention back. He looked down at the box. The iron latch was sealed tight, rusted into place, but as he touched it again, it gave off a faint vibration, almost like it recognized his hand. Elias yanked back, heart pounding. What was this thing? Treasure? A curse? Both? He thought of Cartwright's smirk, of the debts waiting in town, of the hollow hunger gnawing inside his belly. The desert offered no mercy. The only chance he had, the only sliver of hope, rested within this chest. As the sun sank and shadows grew long, Elias sat beside the box, lantern ready for the coming night. The desert cooled, winds shifting into a mournful whistle. Then it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. But this time it was followed by a sound Elias had not expected. A voice, faint, strained, coming from inside. Help, me. Elias froze, his blood turning to ice. Rufus barked frantically, circling the chest. Elias leaned in, his breath shallow. Who's there? He whispered. Help. The voice was ragged, inhuman yet human, like something old and broken trying to mimic speech. Open. Elias staggered back, shaking his head violently. He clutched his lantern as if its flame could ward off whatever horror was speaking to him. The chest rattled. Rufus growled, teeth bared. Elias's heart screamed at him to run, but desperation chained him to the spot. He looked toward the ridge where Cartwright had disappeared. If the man came back and found this thing, there would be no stopping him. The farmer's hands shook as he touched the latch again. The iron was cold, biting against his skin, but it began to shift, slowly, willingly. The chest wanted to be opened, and Elias, against every warning in his soul, felt the pull to obey. The latch gave way with a groan so sharp it pierced the night. Elias flinched, half expecting the desert itself to split open at the sound. Sand shifted, Rufus barked wildly, and the lantern flame bent toward the chest as though pulled by an unseen force. Elias hesitated, hand hovering above the lid. His breath came fast, uneven. Memories collided in his mind, his wife's last words, his daughter's laughter, his grandfather's tales of cursed gold. Still, hunger outweighed fear. Desperation drowned hesitation. With a grunt, he pushed the lid open. The hinges screeched like tortured metal. Inside, the chest was not filled with coins or jewels, but with darkness, a black so complete it seemed to swallow the lantern's glow. Elias leaned closer, squinting until something began to take shape. A cloth, ancient, brittle, yet shimmering faintly as if woven with threads of light. Beneath it, Elias saw glimmers, metal fragments, etched with symbols he could not read. He reached in, fingers brushing the cloth. The moment he touched it, a shock raced through his body. His vision blurred. He saw flashes, armored men burying the chest, blood staining the sand, whispers in a tongue not spoken for centuries, a secret hidden, a power chained. Elias yanked his hand back, stumbling onto the sand. His chest rose and fell rapidly. Rufus whimpered, tail tucked, eyes locked on the open box. And then, again, the voice. Free me. But this time, Elias understood something else. The voice wasn't asking. It was commanding. The cloth stirred on its own, shifting like it was breathing. Beneath it, the faint glimmer of gold shone brighter as though awakened. Elias's mind spun. If there was gold, relics, even a fragment of treasure, it could save him. Maybe it was cursed, maybe it was dangerous, but wasn't survival already a curse? He reached again, this time gripping the edge of the cloth. Evening, Elias. The voice was not from the chest. Elias froze, blood draining from his face. He turned slowly. Cartwright stood at the edge of the pit, flanked by two men. Both carried rifles slung casually over their shoulders, but their eyes were sharp, trained on Elias and the chest. Couldn't resist, could you? Cartwright said, grinning. He dropped into the pit with a thud, boots sinking into the sand. His men followed, rifles shifting slightly, enough to remind Elias where the power stood. It's mine, Elias said hoarsely. His hands shook but did not release the cloth. Yours? Cartwright crouched near the chest, smirking. I don't recall your name on any treasure maps. I don't recall you having rights to secrets buried before your sorry family even drew breath. He tapped the chest with his boot again. No, Elias. This here is fortune. And fortune doesn't belong to the weak, it belongs to men who can take it. Rufus growled, teeth bared, fur bristling. One of Cartwright's men lifted his rifle slightly, and Elias quickly raised a hand. Don't, he said, voice breaking. Cartwright chuckled. Always begging. That's why you're nothing, Elias. Always scraping. Never taking. Elias's chest burned with shame, anger, grief. His whole life, humiliation, poverty, loss, boiled in his veins. For a moment he wanted to hurl himself at Cartwright to tear the grin off his face, but then the chest pulsed again, a faint glow leaking from beneath the cloth. Cartwright noticed. His grin widened. Well now, he whispered. Ain't that interesting? He reached down. No. Elias lunged, slamming the lid shut before Cartwright's hand could touch the cloth. The chest groaned, the sand around it vibrating as though the desert itself was angered. Rufus barked furiously, snapping at Cartwright's boots. Cartwright shoved Elias hard. The farmer fell backward, hitting the sand with a grunt. Pain shot through his ribs. Cartwright leaned close, his voice low, venomous. You don't have the strength for this, Elias. You don't have the guts, but me? I'll take what I want, always have, always will. He shoved the lid open again. The glow intensified, bathing their faces in sickly light. The cloth writhed now, unmistakably alive, symbols flashing across its weave. Cartwright's men exchanged uneasy looks, rifles faltering for a moment. What in God's name is that? One muttered. Gold dressed in superstition, Cartwright snapped. Nothing more. But Elias saw the doubt in his eyes. The chest's voice whispered again, louder this time. Free me. The men stiffened. Cartwright hesitated, just for a second, then reached inside. His hand touched the cloth. His body convulsed, eyes rolling back, veins in his neck standing out as though fire burned through him. He gasped, choking, yet still clutched tighter. Elias stared, horrified. Cartwright's face twisted with pain, then greed, then something darker. The symbols from the cloth crawled up his arm, glowing faintly before vanishing beneath his skin. When he finally pulled his hand free, his chest heaved. He stumbled back, laughing breathlessly. Power, he whispered. Real power. Elias scrambled to his feet, voice trembling. You don't understand what that thing is. Oh, I understand just fine, Cartwright said, his grin manic. You thought this could save you, Elias. But this, he gestured at the chest, this will make me more than any man in this desert. Rufus barked, snapping at Cartwright's leg. One of the riflemen kicked the dog away hard. Rufus yelped, rolling into the sand. Elias cried out, rage and fear twisting inside him. Cartwright sneered. Take the chest. We'll deal with Elias later. The men moved forward, gripping the heavy box. The glow dimmed slightly, as though resisting their touch, but they forced it up, grunting under the weight. Elias lunged, desperation giving him strength. No! He grabbed the side of the chest, pulling, his muscles screaming. It's mine! Cartwright slammed a fist across his jaw, sending him sprawling. The taste of blood filled Elias's mouth. He lay in the sand, chest heaving, watching as the men dragged the chest up the pit. Above him, Cartwright loomed, shadow stretching long in the moonlight. His eyes burned with greed and something else, something not entirely his own. This is where your story ends, Elias, Cartwright said coldly. You'll be forgotten. Just another fool who thought the desert owed him something. Elias's vision blurred. His jaw throbbed, his ribs ached, but in his chest, a fire still burned. Forgotten? No, not yet. With the last of his strength, he pushed himself up, spitting blood onto the sand. Rufus staggered to his side, limping but ready, growling low. The chest pulsed one final time, louder, stronger. The desert was no longer silent. The night cracked open with violence. Cartwright's men strained against the weight of the chest, dragging it up the slope. The glow seeped through the cracks, pulsing like a heart, desperate to escape. Rufus barked, hoarse but fierce, his body trembling from the kick he had endured. Elias staggered beside him, ribs aching, jaw bloodied, but his eyes blazed. He would not let them take it. Not after all the years of hunger, of loss, of humiliation. Not after the voice that had whispered through the sand promising salvation or damnation. Whatever was in that chest, It had called to him, and no man, not even Cartwright, would steal it. Elias grabbed his shovel from the dirt, gripping it with both hands. The wood was cracked. The blade rusted, but it was all he had. "Leave it!" he shouted, voice raw. Cartwright turned, his face twisted with triumph and something unholy. The symbols that had crawled up his arm still faintly glimmered beneath his skin. His grin widened. "Look at you," he sneered. "Broken, starving, standing there with your toy shovel. You really think you can stop me?" Elias raised the shovel, chest heaving. "It's mine," Cartwright laughed. "No, Elias. It belongs to power, and power belongs to men like me." He signaled his men with a jerk of his chin. One swung his rifle forward, aiming squarely at Elias. The metallic click of the chamber echoed like a death bell. Rufus lunged. The dog sank his teeth into the rifleman's arm, forcing the weapon skyward. The gunshot shattered the silence, a flare of fire and sound ripping across the desert night. Birds scattered from a lone cactus, their cries echoing into the void. "Damn mutt!" the man roared, trying to shake Rufus off. Elias charged. He swung the shovel with all the fury of a man who had lost too much. The rusted blade connected with the second rifleman's side. The man grunted, collapsing to the sand, weapon skidding out of reach. Cartwright cursed, pulling a revolver from his belt. He leveled it at Elias, eyes gleaming with murder. The chest pulsed again, harder. A blast of heat surged from it, knocking the struggling rifleman backward, forcing Rufus free. Elias felt the vibration through his bones, his teeth rattling as though the earth itself had roared. The lantern toppled, its flame flaring, throwing long, dancing shadows across the pit. Cartwright's revolver shook in his hand. He steadied it, snarling. "You're not taking this from me!" Elias dove. The shot rang out, deafening, the bullet grazing his shoulder. Pain exploded, but adrenaline carried him. He slammed into Cartwright, the two men crashing into the sand. The revolver fired again into the dark, missing both of them. They grappled, fists striking, sand filling their mouths and eyes. Cartwright was stronger, fueled by greed and whatever dark energy had seeped into him from the chest. He pinned Elias down, hands tightening around his throat. "You were always nothing," Cartwright hissed. "This land, this chest, it's mine. You'll die as you lived, weak and forgotten." Elias's vision blurred. Air fled his lungs. His hands scrabbled against Cartwright's grip, finding no purchase. The world dimmed. Then he felt fur against his arm. Rufus. The dog leapt, teeth tearing into Cartwright's shoulder. Cartwright roared in pain, loosening his grip. Elias gasped for air, vision sharpening again. He seized the moment, snatching a fistful of sand and shoving it into Cartwright's eyes. Cartwright howled, staggering back, blinded. Elias crawled toward the chest, every movement agony, his wounded shoulder screaming. The glow from within seemed to beckon him, urging him closer. The voice returned, filling his skull. "Take it. It's yours." His hands trembled above the cloth. He could feel its heat, its pulse, as though life itself surged within. If he claimed it now, maybe it would give him the strength to finish this, to finally end Cartwright. Behind him, Cartwright roared again, wiping his eyes, raising the revolver. Rufus barked, placing himself between them, teeth bared. "No!" Elias cried. "Rufus! No!" The gunshot thundered. Rufus yelped. The sound tore through Elias more violently than the bullet ever could. His heart shattered as he saw his loyal companion collapse, blood staining the sand. Elias's grief turned to fire. He grabbed the cloth. The moment his fingers closed around it, power surged through him, burning, tearing, consuming. Visions seared across his mind. Endless deserts, rivers of gold, cities rising and falling, men killing for what lay in his hands. Cartwright's revolver shook as he aimed. Elias turned slowly, eyes burning with the same light now coursing through his veins. The symbols crawled up his arms, glowing like molten iron. His wounds no longer screamed. They burned with energy. Cartwright's face twisted with fury. "No, it's mine!" he fired. The bullet stopped inches from Elias, falling into the sand like a pebble. The power within him hummed, defying steel and fire. Cartwright stared, stunned. Then rage replaced fear. He charged, tackling Elias again. Both men crashed against the chest. The cloth pulsed violently, light exploding outward, shaking the ground. The desert groaned. The air filled with a sound like 1,000 whispers rising all at once. The rifleman fled, scrambling into the darkness, too terrified to stay. But Cartwright clung to Elias, fists flying, teeth bared. "I'll tear it from you," he screamed. Elias struck back, strength unnatural, each blow fueled by grief, rage, and the unearthly force of the chest. Blood spattered the sand. Their bodies rolled, colliding against stone, every strike echoing like thunder. The chest rattled, splitting along its seams. A blinding light erupted, searing the night. Both men were thrown back, sprawling. The cloth floated above the chest now, alive, writhing, its symbols blazing. Cartwright crawled toward it, his face twisted with obsession. "Mine," he whispered, reaching out. Elias, chest heaving, crawled too, but his hand stopped. He looked back at Rufus, lying motionless, breath shallow, eyes still flickering with loyalty even in pain. Tears blurred Elias's vision. He whispered, "Not for me, not for him." And with the last of his strength, Elias grabbed the shovel again. He swung it hard, not at Cartwright, not at himself, but at the chest. The rotting wood shattered. The glow exploded skyward, tearing the night apart. Cartwright screamed, his voice swallowed by the light. His body convulsed, symbols blazing before his figure was flung into the darkness, vanishing into the dunes. Elias shielded his eyes, collapsing to the sand. The power roared above him. Then, silence. When he opened his eyes, the chest was gone. Only ashes remained, scattered into the desert winds. And beside him, Rufus whimpered weakly, still alive. Elias gathered the dog into his arms, holding him tight, tears falling freely into the blood-stained sand. The desert was silent again, but Elias knew it was not over. The desert stretched endlessly before Elias, vast and silent, its heat fading as dawn crept over the dunes. The night had been a tempest of fury, fire, and fear, but now the world seemed calmer, almost reverent. Rufus stirred weakly beside him. Elias cradled the dog in his arms, brushing sand from his fur. The loyal companion had survived, battered but alive. Relief washed over him like water after a storm, and for the first time in years he allowed himself to breathe without pain. The chest was gone. The glow, the whispers, the pulse, they had vanished with the night. But Elias knew it had not been gone forever. It had chosen him, then discarded the unworthy. Cartwright's greed had destroyed him. Somewhere in the dunes, the man had vanished, carried away by the very power he had tried to control. Elias did not mourn him. He understood now. The desert had its own justice. Elias rose slowly, every joint aching, his shoulder still throbbing from the gunshot graze. He looked around at his land, the barren sand, the cracked earth, the skeletons of cactus and scrub, but he saw it differently. What once seemed hopeless now felt alive with possibility. Survival had carved strength into him. Courage had carved clarity. He walked to the edge of the mound, brushing his hand along the warm sand. The earth had shifted, scarred by the struggle, but fertile with the story it now held. Elias understood that some treasures were not meant to be held in the hand, counted or sold. Some treasures were trials, tests of heart, of faith, of loyalty, and he had passed. Rufus whimpered, nudging his hand. Elias smiled faintly, whispering, "We're still here, boy. We're still here." By mid-morning he had gathered what little he needed and patched the shack as best he could. The scars of the night remained, sand still clinging to wounds, bruises etched into skin. But Elias moved with purpose. He would tend his land, sow seeds where none had grown before, and survive because he had been given a second chance. Cartwright would not return. The desert had taken care of him in its own cryptic way. He had been consumed by the very thing he sought to exploit, a fate sealed by greed and arrogance. Elias felt neither joy nor satisfaction at the thought, only quiet acceptance that the desert had its balance, and that justice did not always need human hands. The sun climbed higher, painting the land in warm gold. Birds returned, singing above the dunes, and the wind, once ominous and restless, now carried a softer promise. Elias knelt, planting seeds in the sand. Each handful of soil felt heavier with meaning, filled with hope and possibility. He looked down at Rufus, still limping but standing. "We'll grow something here," he said softly, "something strong." And in that moment he understood the lesson the chest had offered. Courage is tested in moments of fear. Faith is strengthened through adversity, and loyalty, whether to family, friends, or a dog, can outshine even the darkest greed. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, had not destroyed him. It had taught him. If you followed Elias's journey from a poor, desperate farmer to a man who faced darkness and survived, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Click the notification bell so you won't miss the next story, and share in the comments where you're watching from. Every desert has its secrets, every person their courage, and every story its lesson. Come see which one unfolds next. Elias rose fully now, Rufus by his side, eyes fixed on the horizon. The desert was wide, endless, and full of promise once more. He would live, he would endure, and he would remember. Even in the harshest lands, hope can bloom. The wind whispered through the dunes, carrying the memory of the chest, the night's battle, and the triumph of heart over greed. And Elias walked forward, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever the desert would ask of him next.